Ethan Harper stood in the white sterile hallway of St. Mary's Medical Center, gripping the edge of a wooden bench as if it were the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth, breathing heavily. The fluorescent lights above him buzzed like angry insects, and the smell of disinfectant burned his nostrils, but none of it compared to the burning sensation in his chest after hearing those 3 words from Dr. Richardson. "You have cancer." He replayed the sentence over and over in his mind, trying to make sense of how his life had just shattered in the span of a single appointment. Shaking head. Ethan was only 34 years old, a marketing consultant who jogged every morning, drank green smoothies, and had never smoked a day in his life, yet here he was told that his body had turned against him, that rogue cells were multiplying inside his lungs like a silent army preparing for war. Claire, his wife of 6 years, was waiting for him in the parking lot. She had wanted to come inside, but Ethan insisted he could handle it alone now. He regretted that decision because the weight of this news felt too heavy to carry by himself. Sighs deeply. He walked slowly toward their silver sedan, watching her through the windshield as she scrolled through her phone, unaware that everything was about to change. When he opened the car door, Claire looked up with those warm hazel eyes that had made him fall in love with her at a college party years ago. Her smile faded the moment she saw his face. "Ethan, what did the doctor say?" Voice trembling. He slid into the passenger seat and stared straight ahead, unable to meet her gaze. His hands were shaking, and his throat felt like it was closing up. The words came out broken and barely audible. "It's cancer, Claire. They found a tumor in my left lung, stage 3, voice cracking." Claire gasped, and her phone slipped from her hands onto the floor mat. She reached for him, pulling him into a tight embrace as tears began streaming down both their faces. Crying. For a moment they sat there in the parking lot, 2 people clinging to each other as the world around them blurred into nothingness. The first month after the diagnosis felt like living in a nightmare that Ethan could not wake up from. The chemotherapy sessions began almost immediately, and each treatment left him weaker than the last. Groaning in pain, his thick brown hair started falling out in clumps during showers, and the man who once ran 5 miles every morning could barely walk to the mailbox without feeling exhausted. Claire had promised to be there through everything, and at first she drove him to appointments, sat beside him during infusions, held his hand when the nausea became unbearable, whispering softly. But as weeks turned into months, Ethan noticed something shifting in her eyes, a distance that had not been there before. She smiled less often, stayed on her phone more frequently, and sometimes disappeared for hours, claiming she needed to clear her head. One evening as Ethan lay on their bed too weak to move, he heard Claire talking on the phone in the kitchen. Her voice was different, lighter, almost playful in a way it had not been with him in weeks. He strained to listen through the ringing in his ears. "I know, Mark, I just need someone who understands." Soft laughter. "Ethan makes everything so heavy right now, I feel like I'm drowning." Ethan felt his heart sink deeper than any physical pain the cancer had caused, closing eyes tightly. Mark was a colleague from her law firm, someone she had mentioned casually before, but hearing his name now in that tone sent alarm bells ringing through his mind. He wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but fear kept him silent. What if his suspicions were wrong? What if pushing her away would only make things worse? The educational moment crept into his thoughts like poison. Sometimes we ignore red flags because facing them feels more terrifying than living in denial, but denial only feeds the betrayal growing in the shadows. 2 months into treatment, Ethan's condition worsened. Despite the aggressive chemotherapy, the tumor had not shrunk as much as Dr. Richardson hoped, and the cancer showed signs of spreading to nearby lymph nodes, coughing violently. Sleep became impossible between the pain, the medication side effects, and the haunting thoughts about Claire's strange behavior. She had grown even more distant, often coming home late, smelling of cologne that was not his. Her excuses were always work-related: late meetings, client dinners, networking events. But Ethan was not foolish. He had been married to this woman for 6 years, and he knew when something was wrong, staring blankly. One afternoon, while Claire was supposedly at the office, Ethan summoned the strength to check her laptop that she had left open on the kitchen counter. His hands trembled, not from illness, but from the terror of what he might discover. The messages were right there on the screen. No password needed, no hidden files, just brutal honesty between Claire and Mark. "I cannot keep doing this, Mark. I feel so guilty, but when I am with you I forget about the hospital, the treatments, the dying." Message sent at 2:47 a.m. Mark's response came quickly. "You deserve to feel alive, Claire. What you are going through is impossible. Let me take care of you." Ethan's vision blurred as tears filled his eyes, crying uncontrollably. The betrayal cut deeper than any scalpel could. The woman he had vowed to spend his life with, the woman he was fighting to stay alive for, was seeking comfort in another man's arms while he withered away. He closed the laptop and stumbled back to the bedroom, collapsing onto the mattress. His body was failing, but now his heart had already died. The pain of her infidelity somehow eclipsed even the cancer eating away at his lungs. He realized then that some deaths happen long before the body stops breathing. Ethan did not confront Claire immediately after discovering the messages. Instead, he carried the weight of her betrayal like a second tumor growing inside his chest. Breathing shakily, he watched her move through their home as if nothing had changed, watched her kiss his forehead before leaving for work, watched her lie with such practiced ease that he wondered how long this had been happening. 3 days after finding the messages, Ethan had another appointment with Dr. Richardson. The news was worse than expected. The cancer had metastasized to his liver and bones. The prognosis had shifted from hopeful to grim. Maybe 6 months, the doctor said with sympathetic eyes, maybe less. Heavy silence. When Ethan returned home that evening, Claire was in the shower. He could hear the water running and her humming a song he did not recognize. His hands shook as he sat on the edge of their bed staring at the framed wedding photo on the nightstand. They looked so happy in that picture, so full of dreams and promises. Tears falling. Claire emerged from the bathroom wrapped in a towel, her wet hair clinging to her shoulders. She stopped when she saw his face. "Ethan, what is it? What did the doctor say?" Pretending concern. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw a stranger wearing his wife's face. The woman he married would never have done this, would never have abandoned him when he needed her most. Voice cold and steady. "The cancer has spread, Claire. I have maybe 6 months left." Her hand flew to her mouth and tears welled in her eyes, but Ethan felt nothing watching her perform this grief. Laughing bitterly. "Save it, Claire. I know about Mark. I read your messages. I know that while I have been dying you have been sleeping with him." The color drained from her face and the towel slipped slightly from her grip. Gasping, "Ethan, I can explain." But there was no explanation that could heal this wound, no words that could undo the betrayal. The educational truth became crystal clear in that moment. When we betray someone in their darkest hour, we do not just break their trust, we kill whatever love remained, and we must live forever with that blood on our hands. The weeks following the confrontation were suffocating with silence. Claire moved into the guest room and avoided Ethan as much as possible, walking past quickly. She tried apologizing multiple times, claiming she was weak, that she could not handle watching him die, that Mark was just an escape from the unbearable reality. But Ethan had nothing left to give her, not forgiveness, not understanding, not even anger. His body deteriorated rapidly. The hospice nurse, Miss Patricia, came daily to manage his pain and monitor his vitals. She was a kind woman in her 50s who had seen death many times, but even she seemed heartbroken by Ethan's situation. Speaking gently. "You deserve better than this, Ethan," she said one afternoon. "You deserve to be surrounded by love." But love had abandoned him long before his body would. Ethan spent his final weeks in their bedroom, staring out the window at the maple tree in the backyard, watching its leaves turn from green to gold to brown just as his life was fading through seasons too quickly. Breathing weakly. Claire stood in the doorway on his last day, her face swollen from crying. Mark had ended things with her once he realized the guilt was too much to bear, and now she was alone with the consequences of her choices. Sobbing. "Ethan, I am so sorry. Please forgive me. I was selfish. I was a coward." Ethan turned his head slowly to look at her one final time. His voice was barely a whisper, struggling to speak. "I died the day I found out about you, and Mark, my body is just catching up now." Those were his last words to her before the sun set that evening. Ethan Harper took his final breath, not from cancer but from a heart that had already been shattered beyond repair. Flatline sound. What we learn. This story teaches us that betrayal during someone's most vulnerable moment is a wound that never heals. Selfishness and seeking comfort outside our commitments when things get difficult destroys not only relationships but the very soul of those we claim to love. Claire's inability to stay strong in hardship, her choice to prioritize her own emotional escape over her dying husband's needs shows how weakness and self-centeredness can turn us into villains in someone else's tragic story. The greatest tragedy is not always death itself, but dying alone, abandoned by those who promised forever. Ethan's story reminds us that our choices during another person's darkest hour define our character permanently, and some mistakes can never be forgiven or forgotten.